Hi friends, I'm Abby and welcome back to my channel. Today I'm going to be doing a if you like this then I think you will like that video. So I've done one of these before which I will link, but this is a new list with some new books to recommend. So I have 4 pairs for you today and of a variety of genres, and I don't know, they're still very different, but I believe if you like one, then I think you will like the other. And I love these sorts of videos. I find them so fun. And you get 2 recommendations in one because if you've read one of them. And I wouldn't say like any of these are more popular than the other. Like I feel as though they're both like similar popularity. It's not like one really popular book and one underhyped book. It's just ones I thought had similarities. I'll start off with the first one. And I've talked about this one before. Like I've voiced this as a theory on different discords. Like this is my theory, and I know it's not like 100% accurate because I have had people say that no, it didn't apply for me, and I'm like, I feel like these books are similar, and if you like one then you have a high probability of liking the other, or if you don't like one then you have a high probability of not liking the other, at least in my experience. And that is with Red Rising by Pierce Brown and Rage of Dragons by Evan Winters. And I've fallen on the side of not liking either of these books. So I noticed the similarities in that I didn't like either of them, but I have known so many people that like both. So I think that if you like one, you will really like the other. I mean, this is hard to explain why, because I mean, I read Red Rising years and years ago, but I feel as if they just have a similar flavour. They just have a similar, I don't know, there's just something about those stories which gives me the same vibes. Maybe it's the vibes of I don't like this, but they have similar vibes. Red Rising is a sci-fi that reads a bit like a fantasy, and you're following a main character called Darrow, and the world is set in, there's like different classes. You have the Red Bloods and the Gold Bloods. I can't remember all of the details, and at the beginning of the book there is a catalyst, which means that Darrow starts infiltrating the gold-blooded people. Then there is this like Hunger Games type scene that happens. So it has like similarities to Hunger Games, but I preferred the Hunger Games. I don't know, I struggled to connect to the writing. I don't know, maybe the motivations. I don't know, I just struggled to visualize it. I read the whole series. I think I kept like reading, hoping that it was going to click. And I will say like the second and third book go slightly in a different direction to that first book. And a lot of people do say that if you were just found the first book okay, you might really like the rest of the series. For me, it was all just okay. But you can take my opinion on it with a grain of salt, because a lot of people love it. And the same with a lot of people really, really liking Rage of Dragons. And that's a it's a revenge story. You're following the main character Tao, who I don't like, and there is a scene at the beginning of the book which is a catalyst for his revenge, and the majority of the book is him seeking his revenge on the people that wronged him. And I feel like for both stories there is this catalyst which then leads to this sort of revenge plot and them trying to right their wrongs. And I feel like in both, I don't know, maybe I just struggled to relate. I feel like revenge is a tricky plot to write. I mean, I feel like it can be done well and I can like it, but maybe it's not something that I like overall. But I don't know, I just feel like there's similarities between the similarities in maybe the writing style. Rage of Dragons is not at all sci-fi, but I just feel like there's similar vibes. But let me know if you think I'm right or wrong on if you like both. But I think that if you like both, if you like one, you'll like the other, and if you don't like one, you probably won't like the other. But there's my opinions on that. Another one, and this is more based on the main character, and not so much like on the plot, but I feel as though there are character similarities, especially, well, in the main character. So the first one being The Girl with the Dragon Tattoo by Stieg Larsson and Ninth House by Leigh Bardugo. So these are very different stories. They're very, very different stories, but I feel as though there are similarities between the characters in both. In The Girl with the Dragon Tattoo, the main character is Lisbeth Salander, and in Ninth House it's Alex Stern. The plots are very different. So this is like a mystery plot as they're trying to uncover what happened to a murder in this small Swedish village, like going back over the cold cases and like investigating it. Where, I mean, Ninth House does have a murder in it as well, so I guess there is that similarity to it, but this has like supernatural themes to it. It has ghosts and undead, and it's set at Yale, so not at all Sweden. So I'd say they're very different vibes. This is very mystery, this is very like fantasy-esque, but they do have mergers in both of them. But I will say the characters is where I'd say the similarity really is, and I think that if you relate or if you enjoy reading from Lisbeth or Alex's perspectives, then you might like the other, because they're both, I'd say, misunderstood characters, or misunderstood in like their world, and I enjoyed both of their perspectives, but they're not the most likable, and they're not the most, I guess, like mainstream people. Like if you've got the trope not like other girls, then there's probably these. They're not like other girls. They're both a bit quirky, they're both a bit unlikable, they're both a bit, they don't really care what other people think about them. That's how I would describe them. I didn't really find them unlikable. Like I enjoyed reading from their perspectives. I liked them. They both have troubled past as well. Like they both have had struggles. I'd say if you like one of them, then you might like the other. I mean, they're very, very different in lots of senses. So you might like one and you might not like the other. But I think if you're a character-driven reader and you enjoy reading these characters, which are, I guess, a bit more troubled and have had struggles, they're not necessarily the most likable, then you probably like both of these. Another pairing is, I think that if you like Jade City, then I think you will like The Sword of Kaigen. So Jade City by Fonda Lee and The Sword of Kaigen by M.L. Wang. They're both inspired by Asia and have Asian settings, but there's more than just that to them. I'd say that the similarities go further than that. They're set in like these fantasy worlds that have modern influences. So Jade City, originally I thought it was like it was going to be an epic fantasy, but it's more urban, and so you have things like cars and phones and things. So at first I was like, what are these doing here? Well, what are these cars and phones doing in this fantasy world? Because sometimes you just don't expect it. You don't expect to see some modern touches and these urban things in a very fantasy setting with a very fantasy-like magic system. And the same can be said for Sword of Kaigen. So Sword of Kaigen, you were set in this place called Kaigen, but you were following two characters, Misaki and Mamoru, her son. And you do have like flashbacks to Misaki's past, where she was in another part of the world, which was much more developed than Kaigen itself. So Kaigen does feel like a very rural, epic place because it's very backwards and hasn't really progressed. It's very isolated. But other parts of the world have things like cars and phones and technology. So they both have these worlds which are advanced, but also fantasy. So that juxtaposition of fantasy and technology and a modern world in a fantasy setting. And so a slightly interesting thing how you sort of combine modern technology with magic, and that. I mean, the magic systems are different. In the Sword of Kaigen, it's like a combination of like samurai fighting with elemental magic, so like some can wield ice or fire or whatever. And here they use Jade as their like source of power and magic. Yes, I'll just say they have similar vibes in that sense. So if you enjoy like an Asian inspired fantasy with modern touches, then I would recommend these. I'd say for both of them, they have maybe not necessarily a slower start, but they're not like the most fast paced. This one is very political because you're following like, it's like a mafia gang style warfare over the Jade in this city and like the political machinations behind that, and then these two ruling families trying to control the city and the Jade. I like really enjoyed it, but it's not the most fast paced. And the same can be said with Sword of Kaigen. It's got an interesting pacing because at the beginning it sort of builds up and you have the flashbacks, and then like the peak of the book is really in the middle, and that's where a lot of the battle and the action scenes are. And then the second half of the book, it sort of slows down again as you look at the aftermath of that. So it was both not necessarily structured in the most like traditional way. I would say you don't exactly, this one you do build up to a more action-packed ending, but they're slightly different in the way that they have structured their plots, I would say. And then the final recommendation I have for if you like this, then I think you will like that, is Winter's Orbit by Everina Maxwell. And I think that if you like this, then you would like The Goblin Emperor by Catherine Addison. Now, I caveat this with that I really liked this, but I wasn't a massive fan of The Goblin Emperor. But I feel as though there are similar vibes between them, and similar plot points between them. So I feel as though there are definitely similarities. Winter's Orbit is a sci-fi, but it reads a bit like a contemporary because it's not that sci-fi heavy. And the focus and the strength of this book, I would say, is in the romance between the two main characters, Kiem and Jinen. And that's what I was rooting for as I read this. I was rooting for their characters and their romance and their their relationship, as opposed to the sci-fi plot and the mystery that they were trying to figure out. And the same can be said for The Goblin Emperor. Like, it's not the most like fantasy heavy book. It is more like a political character study in a fantasy world, but you don't really know that much about the fantasy world. Like, it's all very centered around the main character Maya and him coming into power as the emperor, and like what this means for him, and him trying to figure out where he fits in the world, and like figuring out what it means to be the emperor and the characters that he is interacting with. And you never really find out that much about the world, so it doesn't really read that much like a fantasy. It reads probably like a French historical fiction political story. The reason I'd say that these have a lot of similarities is that in this book, Kiem and Jainan are from different planets, and they are in a arranged marriage, and Jainan was originally married to another Kiem's family, and he was killed or died in mysterious circumstances, and then they have ended up being put together to continue the alliance between the planets. It's this sort of mystery over who murdered the previous marriage partner, and trying to figure out that. And the same can be said for the Goblin Emperor, that Maya comes into power because all of his family have been killed. He's like the unwanted son because of his goblin blood, and like the rest of the family are elves, and so he is sort of disregarded and he's sent away, and so that's why he lives. And so all of the rest of the family have been killed on this airship, and well, at the beginning it's like they have died in mysterious circumstances. So it's in both of these, the plot is sort of, the catalyst of the plot is from these characters coming into positions because of the mysterious death of another character. Maya becoming the emperor, Kiem getting put into a political marriage with Jainan, all because of these mysterious deaths. And then you have this mystery plot threaded through the narrative of both stories, where they try and figure out what's gone on. And I'd say in both of them, that plot doesn't like take over. That in this, the forefront is the relationships between these two characters as they build and become closer together. And in The Goblin Emperor, it's more focused on Maya learning the role of being the emperor and what this means for him, with these threads of the mystery threaded throughout. So that's why I'd say they're similar. I didn't get on with The Goblin Emperor, but I think that was more to do with the writing. Because Maya is coming into being the emperor, he is learning a lot, and there are lots of words which aren't English, and so the author has threaded through a lot of words, like a lot of characters, a lot of like different words for different pieces of clothing, for anything and everything, for places. And so there was a very, very extensive glossary, but it was just a bit much for me. It was just a bit dry, which isn't so much of an issue in here, but that's why I struggled with it, and that's why I just struggled to connect to it. That is my final recommendation. But if you like this, then I think you will like that. Let me know if you have read any of these books, if you agree with my recommendations, if you think I'm right or wrong, or if you've liked one but not the other, because I mean, I wasn't a massive fan of The Goblin Emperor, but I see the similarities, so sometimes tricky to say if you like this then you might like that, because just because there's similarities between books doesn't necessarily mean that you're gonna like one and like the other, because of how many different aspects go into a book. But those are some recommendations. Thank you so much for watching. Please like, comment and subscribe, and I will see you in my future videos. Bye!